Well, what we got here? Some nice jasper stones, which is interesting because it actually comes up in the book of Revelation regarding what's called New Jerusalem, a great city which comes down out of heaven from God. So it's interesting to get a view of what jasper stones actually look like. Although, of course, seeing jasper stones here is pretty basic comparable to what will be the description of this great heavenly city which comes down from God out of heaven. And it says it's like, not that it is, but it's like a jasper stone. And also like a precious stone. Also, it's clear glass. So its description and using jasper stones, which you see them there, they got kind of shades to them. So if you go with a bit of background, let's say, on stones, lively stones, which is all relevant to the vision. It's not a story, obviously it's a story, but it's a vision and a reality, and it did actually happen. It's not a fairy tale and not a story. So seeing we're talking about what you might call lively stones, or a great city that looks like even like a jasper stone, many things, many descriptions in the Bible of these various visions that various saints and prophets had. Largely it was all saying like, or as it were, their way of describing something they see or saw. And John saying that this great heavenly city, which was called New Jerusalem, coming down from God, holy city in fact, so a kind of a separated city, not like any other city on earth, holy largely meaning separated. So a separated city, so much different than all the rest, and really lively stones largely come up, or precious stones like jasper, all come up in the description of the vision, let's say. So it's interesting to get a bit of background on stones, and even lively stones. In other words, stones that are symbolically alive spiritually. So, of course, with this, you largely got to step out of today's world or any other world, because we are indeed going out of this world. John went out of this world when he saw this vision. First and foremost, it says he was in the spirit. So in other words, he was spiritually made alive by God's spirit. And he appears to have been resting. He said it was the Lord's day, so he happened to be resting. He wasn't doing anything in particular, I guess, but the thing was, he was in the spirit. So first and foremost, he was in the spirit. In other words, in the spiritual presence of God, made alive spiritually. Him, in this sense, being also a lively stone, made alive by God's spirit. And it's then when he was in the spirit on the island of Patmos all alone that he suddenly got a vision of Jesus. And as the vision progressed, he hears a voice in heaven saying, "Come up hither." And he sees a door open in heaven, and then he was on the other side of that door on a spiritual trip, you might say. Well, a spiritual trip does come up in relation to the vision of the heavenly city. So a bit of background on lively stones. And here we are, we're going to step out here of the world And what have we got in the world? The worldwide media and all this. Largely to do with the rhetoric and all of this coming out of man's mouths and the war of words. So, wherefore, we're in 1 Peter chapter 2. Wherefore, laying aside all malice and all guile, all of this to do with the mouth, you see, all malice and all guile, and hypocrisy and envies, and all evil speakings. Well, we have a lot of that going on in the world today. So we're going to, God willing, step out of all of this. And so Peter goes on to say, as newborn babes, desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. So, in other words, in tuning into God's word spiritually, then the words feed us spiritually. So, as newborn babes, assuming you are one of God's children, and you are a newborn babe, maybe you were once, or recently a person. Peter here has no doubt been preaching the gospel, and many have believed in his in the words that he preached, and have been born again spiritually. So, as with a newborn baby in the physical, he first needs to grow physically, and so he drinks milk. So, as newborn babes, Peter is saying here, as a spiritual newborn baby, you're going to need milk, the milk of God's word. In other words, the spiritual words of God, which a newborn babe, or even an older babe, feeds upon. Newborn babes drink milk, as you might or do, whichever mature. Then, God willing, we will eat meat. So again, symbolic descriptions of the same. And as newborn babes, desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. If so be ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious. So maybe you've had some kind of the Lord, God, Jesus is talking to you. And you're beginning to realize that the Lord is gracious, in other words, full of mercy, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. So here's Jesus, he's the living stone. Ye also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house. So each one of us is a stone, and God willing, we're all part of God's spiritual house. Jesus also being the stone, he being the chief cornerstone of the house. If anyone ever has had anything to do with building a house, it's so important to get the first stone that you lay in building that house, the cornerstone, completely right and level and set in the right place, because that's the stone you build the whole house in connection to and of. And if you get the cornerstone wrong, then the whole house will be out of alignment. And so ye as lively stones are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. So it goes on, wherefore also it is contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone. Now here's Jesus, the chief cornerstone. The whole building is built of and from that chief cornerstone. And the cornerstone is, of course, has to be completely correct for the whole house to be in alignment and built in connection to and of. And so you have an house and holy priesthood. Ye as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. and Jesus here being the main and chief cornerstone. Wherefore also it is contained in Scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, so chosen of God and precious. He that believeth on him shall not be confounded. So those that believe in Jesus won't be disappointed. You will find yourself in, let's say, ye as lively stones. If you come across any other lively stones that are made alive spiritually by the cornerstone, you imagine the cornerstone having a kind of a magnetic influence on all the other stones, and this has a way of making all of those other stones also having this magnetism and spiritual light to them, and magnetizing and drawing in all of these other stones, and they too become magnetized with God's Spirit and become part of the whole house, so to speak. So unto you therefore which believe he is precious, because maybe you felt God's presence, you felt that this stone, this lively stone, was indeed had this magnetism and drawing power and pull to it. You could feel the magnetism of this stone drawing you in, and then suddenly you felt yourself click together with that stone, become part of this spiritual house. Ye then, as lively stones, become magnetized by the same stone and draw in other stones, in magnetizing them again to draw in other stones, and then ye as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. You're made alive spiritually, and so you have, God willing, this magnetism and pull to you as pulled originally and drawn to the lively stone, that lively stone of course being Jesus Christ, the chief cornerstone. So ye as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. So unto you therefore which believe he is precious, because you're part of this spiritual house, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, well, Jesus came unto his own, he says, he preached unto his own, the Jews at the time, but his own received him not. But as many as received him, those who did receive him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. And so they also became as lively stones and had this magnetism and spiritual pull to them, whereas the other stones, you would say, rejected Jesus, would have this repelling element to them and would repel people away from the lively stone. So unto you therefore which believe is precious, and unto them which be disobedient, they become repelling magnets, repelling people away from the kingdom of God, from the house, from the building. The stone which the builders disallowed, they didn't want Jesus, the same is made the head of the corner. So they didn't want Jesus, but even so, whether they wanted him or not, even so, Jesus is made the head of the corner. Now, you can see this in two ways. Jesus being the chief cornerstone on the kind of foundation level of the whole building. Or actually, you might, of course, these days we have pictures of this pyramid everywhere and all this sort of stuff all over the internet. On the dollar, you have this capstone with the eye in it and what have you. But you can see Jesus as the chief cornerstone from the foundation level. But the stone which the builders disallowed, in this sense, has become the chief cornerstone. But if you're kind of looking at God's heavenly city, not only do you kind of see, like I say, as it were, it's kind of what you're trying to describe. It's similar to this, or it's like that. Jesus, of course, is not a stone. He's a person, and it's symbolic. And Jesus is the chief cornerstone, and the whole building is built off as from this chief cornerstone. And so the building is all in alignment, well balanced out, and a solid building. But if you're looking at New Jerusalem, heavenly city, the heavenly city actually is described as being pyramidical in shape. Now, some artists draw this as being square, but others choose to see heavenly city, New Jerusalem, as being pyramidical in appearance and shape. And so you kind of picture, in this sense, you've got what they're trying to imitate in the world, and even what you see on the back of the dollar with the picture of the pyramid there with the eye in it of the capstone, and this eye, of course, being Lucifer and all this. But actually, it's actually fabrication and a copy of the same. Largely, the description of the heavenly city is both symbolic and literal. So you have this chief cornerstone. You can either see this chief cornerstone as being on the foundation level, which the whole building is built off of and from, or you can see this cornerstone as being the main capstone, not of course the eye of Lucifer, but Jesus Christ. And years lively stones are made up a spiritual household, because Jesus is the head of the house in the symbolic sense. He is actually the capstone, and not, of course, Lucifer, the imitator. So unto you therefore which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner. So I kind of choose to see him as kind of in the pyramidical sense. In the vision that John had in the book of Revelation, he's like the capstone, not, of course, the eye in the capstone being Lucifer. And a stone, so Jesus, here's what happens, and a stone of stumbling to those that disbelieve, that don't want, of course, Jesus. He is a stone of stumbling and a rock of offence. They were offended at Jesus because they crucified him. So the thing is, we all, they didn't perceive the signs of the times back then when Jesus came. And so they kind of, because they hadn't perceived the signs of the times, I mean, we perceive the signs of the times now, and we're looking to the second coming of Jesus Christ because we're looking at the signs of the times. Well, Jesus said to the Pharisees back then that they could discern the sky in the morning if it's red and all this, and then it's going to be a good day or a bad day the next day, and all this. So they could perceive the signs of the times regarding the weather. But as far as the signs of the times and the Messiah coming to the first coming of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, they stumbled upon him. They didn't see it coming. Suddenly, the kingdom of heaven was upon them, and because Jesus was here, and they stumbled upon him. So rather than believe, of course, they were offended, and therefore they stumbled. Now, everyone is going to stumble upon Jesus sometime in their lives. They might not be looking for Jesus, but the fact is that the gospel is going to be preached in all the world, and to many people, it's going to be a rock of offense and a rock of stumbling. And rather than believe in Jesus and see the stone as we do as being precious, to us who believe the stone is because precious, he's our lifeblood and our spiritual magnetism and life, and therefore we become as lively stones, so we see the stone as precious. But those who disbelieve and are offended, they stumble. And from then onwards, their lives will never be the same, in that a rock of offence and a stumbling. So everything will change from then onwards for those who disbelieve, and of course these go under a strong delusion. And so he's a rock of stumbling, a rock of offence and a rock of stumbling. And a stone of stumbling and a rock of offence, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. So it's all God's plan, and whether people believe or not, either way, it's all God's plan. It's all going God's way. It's all part of God's great plan for mankind. So some believe and some stumble and disbelieve. And once we've all had our encounters and visitations and chances via Jesus Christ, from then onwards, everything in our lives will change. So to those that believe, you will not be confounded, it says. To them which were elect precious, wherefore also it is contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. In other words, you won't be disappointed, and you won't be offended. You'll realise that you've made the right decision in believing in Jesus. But of course, those that disbelieve are going to stumble. And either way you look at it, a person's life will never be the same, depending upon our choices. So, lively stones, and this is God willing what we all are, because God willing we're all in the Spirit, or we get in the Spirit, though there's many distractions in this world to get us out of the Spirit. And once having received Jesus in our hearts, we realise indeed that there is a spiritual side of life. And having Jesus in our hearts, once we have him in our hearts, we cannot deny that indeed God is real. We've come to God through Jesus and have been made as lively stones. Ye as lively stones are built up a spiritual house. So it's kind of what it's going into in this vision that John had of the New Jerusalem. So here's John in the book of Revelation, and we're in chapter 21. And he's saying, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. So when he says heaven here, he means the atmospheric heavens being the sky. So when God creates a whole new earth and a whole new heaven after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, this is after the great white throne judgment, when every person on earth, except for the ones that are saved, that believe in Jesus, have the books open, and God decides where they're going to go in the great hereafter, because we all die and go to the hereafter when we die. But when you think of the more great hereafter, we're looking at after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, and the final destination of either the saints of all ages or the final destination of all of the peoples of all ages. And so the sea and the earth gives up the dead which are in it, and all this there, and everyone gets to stand before the great white throne judgment seat of God, and the books are open and the dead are judged out of those things which are written in the books. Everything a person has ever done and said is all recorded, and one day all of this, all of these books will be opened. Also the book of life, it's all going to be opened, and the dead are judged out of those things which are written in the book. So there's two resurrections. There's the resurrection of the just, those who chose to believe in Jesus Christ in this life. They have their books opened at the second coming of Jesus Christ. So we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive of the things done in his body according to that which he have done. This is talking about the saints of all ages. These have the books open of their lives at the second coming of Jesus Christ. But those who didn't choose to believe in Jesus in this life, that were offended at this rock, which they saw as a rock of offense, and then they stumbled at it, rather than see this stone and look at it and think, wow, look at that stone, that precious stone, and you maybe reached down and cherished it, picked it up and treasured it and held it dear and close to your heart like you would a precious stone. Whereas others discarded it and were offended by it, and so they stumbled. And you could say they stumbled, and their lives really would never be the same after this. And many of us stumbling eventually into that other world, especially when a person dies if he didn't receive Jesus in this life. Then, of course, in this sense, they're stumbling into the underworld at the heart of the earth, a place where Jesus went. when he died for 3 days before he was resurrected. The third day, Jesus went to the heart of the earth to preach to those that were disobedient down there, that would have stumbled and eventually stumbled into the heart of the earth, that other realm at the centre of the earth, looking at this spiritually. This is where those that choose not to believe in Jesus in this life go. And so we're those death and Hades one day, the underworld, which they use the word Hades in the New Testament. All of these in Hades, in the underworld, at the heart of the earth, will one day be resurrected. 2 resurrections: the resurrection of the just. These have the books opened at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. But those that didn't believe in Jesus in this life, the books are all opened after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. And after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, this is when God creates a whole new heaven. So the atmospheric heavens up there will look different after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. And he creates a whole new heaven and a whole new earth. This is what John's talking about here. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. So we're on an entirely different world now. This world that we now know will pass away. One day God will fold it up like a garment, and old garments that served its use and purpose. It'll all be folded up. The earth will be folded up. The atmospheric heavens, it will all be folded up. And then God will create a whole new heaven and a whole new earth after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. And of course, with the books all being opened and the resurrected saints all having their books open at the second coming of Jesus Christ, we all get to find out really where we all get to go and live in the great hereafter. You could say we're now looking at the great hereafter, when all is done and dusted in the world, and the great overture of God's grand orchestra, suddenly it all climaxes here with this whole new heaven and a whole new earth, and then everyone getting to know where they're going to go and live in the great hereafter, you could say. So here we are, we're in the great hereafter, we're after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. We've gone through the second coming of Jesus Christ. Jesus has set up a new government on the earth, and at the second coming of Jesus Christ, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, Satan was loosed out of his pit. When this 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth comes to its close, he goes out to deceive the nations all over again. And then God brings down fire from heaven and creates a whole new heaven and a whole new earth. And everyone gets to stand before the judgment seat at the great white throne judgment, when the books are opened, and those that are not found written in the book of life you would say, these being the worst of the worst of the worst, go to a place which is symbolically described as the lake of fire burning with brimstone. So, in other words, a place of torment for those that didn't want God, no matter how many chances God gave them. So the very worst of the worst of the worst of the worst find themselves in this place, which is symbolically described as the lake of fire burning with brimstone. But those who didn't have their names blotted out of the book of life, there's still hope for them. Still hope for mankind. God always sees hope for mankind. These get to live on the new earth. You could say when you are born here, all your members, your body, everything about you is all written in the book. You're in the mind of God before you were ever created, before everything was in this sense written down in the book. God had all of your members written down in a book, like a great creator, a great, let's say, designer. First of all, they have all this written down, and the great design of everything all written down and drawn up in what you might say a book. So all your members, what you are, who you are, whether you're male, female, your looks, your height, everything about you was all written down in God's books. In other words, you're in the mind of God before you were even created, before there was anything of you. You were in the mind of God, and then finally God, in this sense, all your members were recorded in God's book. So we're all, in this sense, in the book of life. The big question is here, in that we're written down in God's book. We're by design created by God. Therefore, all your members are already written down in God's book. You're, in this sense, in the mind of God. Before you were even created, God had you in his mind. And then, of course, he created you, much like a mother and father these days, of course, decide to get married and have a child. In this sense, the child is already in their mind. They want a child. But God, of course, being the great creator, the designer of everything, had you in his mind. He knew exactly. All of your members, everything about you was written. It was in the mind of God. It's in the book. So we're all, in this sense, in God's book. The big question is, God gives us a choice. And do we want to be a member of the kingdom of God and have our name recorded in God's book as it's already in the book, that is? Or do we want our name blotted out of God's book? So all the books are opened, and then whosoever is not found written in the book of life, those who didn't want God, no matter how many chances God gave a person, and peoples and nations, those who didn't want God, after being given countless chances, time after time after time, God visiting or coming to various people in their various times in their lives. No matter how many chances a person was given, they finally threw all of this back in God's face. And so, by their own choice, by their own choosing, their names blotted out of the book of life. And these finding themselves in the lake of fire, burning with brimstone, symbolic of a place of torment. So in this sense, in a form of outer darkness, and without God, in the place of fire and brimstone, symbolic of the kind of torment a person will have in a life without God, a life without the central goal. A life where you're just going on off into outer space and going nowhere forever. So lost in forever with no central goal. The central goal of life is, of course, God. Well, here we are. We're now, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. So symbolic here, he sees this great city. I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. So symbolic. This is what this great city looks like, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. So think of it, ye as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. So here you have this New Jerusalem looking like, I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. We kind of think, well, that really must be symbolic, because you're looking at a holy city, which is called New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. He sees a new heaven and new earth. So you picture right, he's seeing this new heaven, this new earth. Let's imagine John here, he's on the spirit trip. He's seeing all this in this vision. So he looks up at the skies, let's say the new heaven and the new skies that God creates for this new earth. And in the distance, he sees this big city coming down from God out of heaven. So way out there, he's looking up, let's say we've obviously got the sky, you can look up there. And in the distance, he sees this great city coming closer and closer to the earth. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. So it's coming down out of heaven, and it's approaching the new earth. You picture this this city slowly moving and becoming closer and closer to the earth. And of course, in the distance, you might see it as a tiny speck, and as it gets closer, it gets larger and larger and larger until finally it settles down on the earth. And he describes the city, and I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared, notice it says here, as a bride. So again, it's like this, it's as a bride. As a bride, adorned for her husband. So it's kind of symbolic. Ye as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. So this spiritual house is not only literal, it's also in this sense symbolic of the church of all ages. And what you have here really is a city coming down from God, which is pyramidical in shape. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle is a tent. In the Old Testament, they had a tabernacle, and this was kind of their temple in the Old Testament. So it's kind of, it's a city, and it's kind of like a temple, and ye as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. So you're made up like, in this sense, a spiritual temple. So it looks like a bride. It's as a bride. It's symbolic. It's symbolic of God's bride. God's bride being the bride of Christ. And saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. So it's like a city. It's like a temple in a way. Is with men. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. This is going to be God's capital city on the new earth. So you have New Jerusalem, not like the old Jerusalem, which brought nothing but trouble and wars and woe to the world. You now have New Jerusalem. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. Tabernacle in the Old Testament was largely associated with the temple. So it's a kind of a temple, and yet it's not a temple. It's like this, it was like that. The tabernacle of God, the dwelling place of God. God, in a sense, always they approached God by having a temple, a tabernacle. But this New Jerusalem, there won't be any temple in it, because God is going to be the temple in this New Jerusalem. As it were going to say, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. And he will dwell with them. So in other words, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. Now God, as a rule, we our Father which art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. So we picture God living way up there in heaven, somewhere out there in the sky, beyond the skies, and in another realm. In the spirit realm, we symbolically look at the heavens as being the dwelling place of God. But of course, God dwells in the spiritual realm dimension, in the other dimension, which we often call heaven. But the actual word for heaven is the skies up there, the atmospheric heavens, consisting of the sky, sun, moon, stars, all of this being the heavens. So, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and now God is leaving the heavens, and he's coming to dwell with mankind. Before, we picture God being in the heavens and dwelling more with the angels. There are 10,000 times 10,000s and thousands of thousands of angels around the throne of God. Earlier on in the vision, John sees this. He sees a vision of God sat on a great throne and 10,000 times 10,000s and thousands of angels all surrounding the throne of God in a form of vision. So we kind of picture God living way out there in the heavens, but now God is coming to earth. He's not just going to dwell in heaven forever amongst the angels in this sense. He's now leaving his heavenly abode, let's say, and he's coming to dwell with mankind. This is what's going to happen on the new heaven and on the new earth. This great city, this heavenly city, this New Jerusalem. comes down from God out of heaven, and now God is coming to earth to dwell amongst men. Behold, so you hear this. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold. So God's moving home here. You picture, well, God's dwelling place is in heaven. This Jesus said, in my Father's house. You picture, well, what? Jesus is talking about this house. In my Father's house, which is in heaven, right? In my Father's house in New Jerusalem. In this sense, let's say. In my Father's house are many mansions. In other words, you're using mansions as symbolic. So in other words, you're going to have a better house, a better home than you do here. And it's going to be symbolically described as a mansion. So when we leave this life and go to our life and our place in God's kingdom, in God's house, let's say, we're going to not exactly live in a mansion. Mansion being symbolic of, there's an interesting, when you, if you look into what's called it in London, mansion blocks, it's quite interesting really. Let's say you're a man and you've got plenty of money, you're a millionaire and you want to live in the city because that's where you work. Well, the heavenly city, New Jerusalem, is really a city all under one roof. It's a house and it's a city, and in this sense it's like a temple, but it isn't a temple because it's the tabernacle of God, but God in fact is the temple in the house, so to speak. So in my Father's house are many mansions. In other words, many what you might describe as apartments. So let's say you're a millionaire and you work in London. You would like to live in a mansion, but this isn't practical because living in a mansion, you'd have to drive for miles to get to work every day. So the nearest thing you're going to get to a mansion is what in London this is, no doubt it's the same in other cities, is what they call a mansion block. So someone going back quite a few years ago had this brilliant idea of people want to live in mansions because it's kind of like the best really, live in a mansion. We all dream perhaps of even having a nice home. We might picture a mansion. But you can't exactly build all of these mansions in London. There isn't room. So someone come up with this brilliant idea of what's called a mansion block. So they designed a big block, let's say, of flats, of apartments, in fact. Flats might sound a bit kind of high-rise buildings, flats. But you had a building with all of these apartments in it. And so what they did, they made the outside of the building in its style being Edwardian or Victorian. So maybe you're a millionaire and you wouldn't mind living in a Victorian style mansion or an Edwardian style mansion. You can't see this working practically. You've got plenty of money. And but driving to work every day would just simply defeat the whole object of having a mansion. So someone come up with this brilliant idea for a businessman, for somebody who's got money, right, who works in London, of what they call mansion blocks. So you had all of these apartments. If you were a millionaire, yeah, you could afford one, in the best part of town. And the outward style of the building would have been either Edwardian, depending upon what you were drawn to, your likes, or Victorian in style. So in this sense, you'll be living in your mansion, and what was called a mansion block, and all of the other people living in this mansion block would have, in the same sense, be in, like Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions. So in my Father's house, in other words, are many apartments. Well, back then when it was written, I guess a mansion was a better description of an apartment. We can kind of picture an apartment now being really, in a symbolic sense, being really suave and swanky and expensive, and it set you back a few million to live in an apartment in a mansion block in the best part of the town with the best neighbours, with no drugs and vice and crime and all this. So you kind of got a symbolic sense there of, in my Father's house are many mansions, in my Father's house are many apartments. And this really is a good enough description, or at least a reasonable basic description of God's house. When Jesus said to his disciples, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, ye may be also. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm telling you this because God's house has many rooms in it, many apartments, many mansions. It's like a block mansion, you might say. So this mansion block, this block mansion, this house, God's house is coming to earth. In my Father's house are many mansions. God's not just moving home, he's moving his home with him. And heaven, and even God and heaven is coming to earth. After the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, God is moving home, and his home's moving with him. In my Father's house are many mansions, and God's mansion block mansion is coming to earth. And God now is going to dwell with man. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God now moving from heaven to earth to dwell with mankind. And God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. This is like the grand kind of climax of the whole plan of God. And everything now is all climaxing in this new heaven and this new earth. And God coming to earth, and finally no more death. God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, no more suffering, crying and sorrow. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are faithful and true. And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And I will give unto him that is the first of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. Now the true overcomers here are those that believe in Jesus. Jesus said, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. So if you want to be an overcomer, then you receive into your heart the one who overcame the world. And so the overcomer here, he that overcometh shall inherit all things. In other words, those who truly believe in Jesus and have overcome the world by taking Jesus into their hearts will inherit all things. So here we are on the new earth, and God now is dwelling with mankind, and there's actually two forms of people now on the earth. There's those that are going to live in the city, this new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. He that overcometh, those that believe in Jesus, in other words, that have received the overcome. This is the victory that overcomes the world, even your faith. Be of good cheer, Jesus said, for I have overcome the world. So if we have the one who's overcome the world in our hearts, then we too have overcome the world, because we couldn't overcome the world, only Jesus could. And so through having Jesus in our hearts, in this sense, we're overcoming the world, because we have the overcomer of the world in our hearts. Jesus did something we couldn't do. And so we acknowledged our imperfection and our sin here. There's no way I can overcome all of the evil in the world. Therefore, I take you, Jesus Christ, into my heart. And by having you in my heart, my sins will be covered, and you in this sense will be my cloak to cover my sins when I stand before God. And when God sees this cloak over my heart, he won't see all of my imperfections and all of my impurities. He'll only see Jesus, the overcomer of the world. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers, those who didn't want God, and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So those who didn't make it through the great white throne judgment, that didn't want God, that rejected God at every opportunity, being given millions, thousands, even millions of chances, still didn't want God. The worst of the worst of the worst, these choosing not to have God in their lives. And finally, therefore, having their names blotted out of the book of life. Those who chose to change and be reformed by this life, be reformed in the next life, going to the underworld of Hades. These being given a second chance, another chance on the new earth. So these are the two types of people that are going to be on the new earth. Those who still have their names in the book of life, that haven't got their names completely blotted out of the book of life yet, if ever they will at all. These being given a new chance on the new earth, but those who, after being given every possible opportunity and chance to change, didn't want God, didn't want to change, insisted upon being murderers, whoremongers, sorcerers, idolaters, and liars. This is what they wanted. So put them all peas like a pod in one pod, and they all get to live together in a place of torment, eternal insecurity. Symbolized here is the lake of fire burning with brimstone, which is the second death. So then it goes on, and there came unto me one of the seven angels, which had the seven vials full of these seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the lamb's, the bride, the lamb's wife. So again, you have the same symbolic sense of this this bride, the lamb's wife. Ye, as lively stones, are made up a spiritual house. And in this sense, you have both symbolic reference to New Jerusalem, as well as this is the home of the saints of all ages after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, on the new earth. Those who get to live in the city of God, that inherit all things. He that overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. And he said unto me, It is done, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is the first of the fountain of the water of life freely. Those who chose to drink of the fountain of the water of the life, these are those that receive Jesus. And these, of course, are the overcomers, because they have the overcomer in their hearts. He that overcometh shall inherit all things. And I will be his God, and he shall be my son. You've chosen to be a son of God, therefore you get to inherit all things. But those who didn't want God in this life, didn't want God in the underworld of Hades, get yet another chance on the new earth, haven't had their names blotted out of the book of life. God created a whole new heaven and a whole new earth, and God coming down to earth. And God's sole purpose here is to wipe away all tears from their eyes. There'll be no more crying, neither sorrow nor death. And so God's home, God's house, New Jerusalem coming down to earth. And here you picture here's John taking for a spirit trip now to visit Space City. So this angel comes to John. Come hither, he says, I will show thee the bride, the lamb's wife. So he's going to now take him for a closer look at heavenly city, at New Jerusalem. John saw it coming down out of the sky like from heaven, approaching the earth. And now the angel was saying to him, Come, I will show thee come hither, I will show thee the bride, the lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit. So John now travelling in this sense in the spirit. So you picture John here in this sense flying, let's say, in a sense, through the sky. And this angel, in this sense, carrying John away in the spirit to heavenly city. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain. Now he's describing this heavenly city, New Jerusalem, as a mountain. Mountains are largely pyramidical in shape. So you picture this New Jerusalem being like a pyramid. And he carried me away in the spirit. So John now traveling on the back of this angel, let's say piggyback riding, if you like, on the back of an angel, flying through in the spirit, in a sense, in the sky, but in the spirit. And he's taken him to for a closer look at New Jerusalem, this great heavenly city, God's house, in my Father's house. Many mansions, many apartments, many rooms in this house for the saints of all ages to live in. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, so pyramidical in shape, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. So it's still descending here. It's slowly descending out of heaven from God. Maybe it was descending way back then, who knows, but it's descending out of heaven, from God, having the glory of God. And her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone. I've got a picture of some jasper stones here. Like a jasper stone. That's what's interesting here. Now there's a jasper stone. So it's like a jasper stone, let's say. It's like a stone most precious. So jasper stones there might appear as solid and not see-through. So it's like a stone having the glory of God. And her light was like unto a stone most precious. So a precious stone, even like a jasper stone. So it's like a jasper stone, not exactly like a jasper stone, but like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Now, jasper stones aren't clear as crystal. So what you're picturing, it's like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. It's also like a precious stone, so you're picturing like a diamond, perhaps like a diamond, a precious stone, like a jasper. So jaspers have shades to them. They're not just one colour, though the heavenly city is described as being like gold. So you picture, well, it kind of sounds like a precious stone and shades of a golden city. And you picture some kind of shades, perhaps, I mean, like a jasper. I'm only saying what it says. I mean, jaspers there's a jasper stones, and they're all in shades. So it's like a jasper, it's like a precious stone, it's clear as crystal, and yeah, it's described as being a golden sea. So having the glory of God, and her light is also has light to it, was like unto a stone most precious. So light shining out of it, seeing the city like a light shining, a shining light. And her light was like unto a stone most precious. So if you picture having a diamond and the sunlight, let's say, shining through it, even like a jasper stone, so it's like a jasper stone. Maybe if the sun shines through a diamond, you might see various colours, but clear as crystal. So he's trying to describe this new heavenly city with physical language that we understand. And it's like all of these. It's not exactly like a jasper stone, it's like it. Having the glory of God, her light was like unto a stone most precious, so it's like a stone most precious. Even like a jasper stone, so you picture shades, clear as crystal. So that's the city. And there he describes this wall around it. And there's a wall surrounding this New Jerusalem, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates. So there's a wall around this city. You see this city, pyramidical in shape, it's coming down to earth. And there's also a wall around this city, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates. And at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east three gates, so you picture this big, let's say, square wall going around New Jerusalem, this pyramidal shaped city, this big wall all around it. And on the east, so he sees this wall, great and high, and had 12 gates, and the gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east three gates, so you picture three gates on one side. On the north three gates on the other side. On the south three gates, and on the west three gates. So three gates either side around this square wall around the city. Three gates on either side, and the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel on these gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations. Now we're looking at the wall still, and the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So you picture here the wall has that's around this city has 12 foundations, like these foundation stones. And in these stones he sees the names of the apostles. So you kind of see how we as lively stones are made up a spiritual house. Here's the spiritual house of God. And you have this wall around the city, and you have the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb in the foundation stones of the wall that is around the city. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city and the gates thereof and the wall thereof. So now he's going to measure the city, he's going to measure the wall, and he's going to measure the gates. And now John goes on to describe the city. And the city lieth 4 square. So you picture here, now imagine a pyramid. On the bottom of this pyramid, it's square. And the city lieth 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth. So it measures completely the same. Either side, the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with a reed, with the reed, so this reed that the angel had in his hand, 12,000 furlongs. Now, a furlong, if you look this up, appears to be 1/8 of a mile. This is 12,000 eighths of a mile in length and breadth. So the city lieth 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth. So if you measured one side, then the other side would be the same length, same width. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. So it's the height and the length and the breadth are all 12,000 furlongs. You change this into miles, so 12,000 1/8 of a mile. You have 1,500 miles high. The city is 1,500 miles high. It's 1,500 miles wide. The length and the breadth of it are all equal. The length and the breadth and the height of it are all equal. It's shaped like a mountain. The angel took John on this spirit trip, and he takes him to a great and high mountain. So great and high mountain, this mountain happens to be, maybe when he saw it in the distance, it happens to be 1,500 miles high. 1,500 miles wide. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. It's like a great mountain. It's like a great pyramid. And the length and the breadth and the height of it are all equal. 12,000 furlongs, 12,000 1/8 of a mile, adds up to 1,500 miles high. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits. Well, a cubit in those days is simply from the elbow to the finger, which is about 18 inches. So you're looking at a cubit is 18 inches long from the tip of your finger to your elbow, 18 inches long. And he measured it out. Now he's measuring the wall outside the city, this wall, which had the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel, either side on the east three gates, on the north three gates, on the south three gates. So he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits. Well, if you look this up, this is actually 216 feet high. The wall around the city is 216 feet high, according to the measure of a man. And so he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man. So 140 and 18 inches is 216 feet high, according to the measure of a man. So in other words, a man's arm being from the tip of his finger to his elbow, this being the 18 inches, he's not using the angel as in his elbow to his finger. According to the measurement of a man, the angel using a man's measurement, so about 18 inches. So this wall is 18 inches, is 216 feet high. So he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of man, that is of the angel using man's measurement being 18 inches from the elbow to the finger, to the tip of the finger, so that being 216 feet high. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper. So now the foundation stones of this wall around the city has the 12 names of the tribes, as the 12 apostles, the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb in the foundation stones. But the wall itself around the city is again, he's using, and the building of the wall of it was of jasper. So you're now picturing this wall, jasper stones yet again. The wall of the city, he says, was of jasper. Now this is the wall and not the city itself. The city was like unto jasper stones. The wall around the city, he now says, is built of jasper, but the foundation stones, which has the names of the 12 apostles in it, is, he describes this now. So here's the foundation stones of the wall around the city. And the foundation of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third a chalcedony, the fourth an emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth a topaz, the 10th a chrysoprasus, and the 11th a jacinth, and the 12th an amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, every several gate was of one pearl. And the street of the city, notice here he describes only one street, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honour into it. Notice it says, and the kings of the earth, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honour into it. So all of the honourable kings and kingdoms now living inside this new Jerusalem, this heavenly city. This, in my Father's house are many mansions, this mansion block, full of 1,500 miles high, 1,500 miles wide, looking like a pyramid, this being the home of the saints of all ages, and only the honourable, unlike now you have this big argument and thing going on in the world, with many people leaving many countries and immigrating abroad and all this. these views that the dishonourable people might come into the country, or dishonourable people might go into their country, and so on. But with New Jerusalem, it'll always be only the honourable people get to go, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honour into it. So only the kingdoms, the honourable kings and honourable kingdoms and honourable peoples going into this New Jerusalem. The debate in the world with immigration, all this has always been whether dishonourable people come in to the country and take your jobs, your lands, your houses, and bring in their culture, which is different than yours. But in this new Jerusalem, will bring in crime and murder and rape, and all this has always been the problem in this world, with all of these arguments and disputes and everything else, all about immigration in the world and everything else, but because of the element of dishonourable people coming in, or overcrowding and all this. But you might think, well, surely they'll be overcrowded in this great city. Well, this great city is 1,500 miles high, 1,500 miles wide. And in my Father's house are many mansions, many apartments. And here you have the saints of all ages, all that they all might be one, as I am one with my Father. Jesus says that they all might be one in us. All of God's children living together under one roof is the picture you get here. In my Father's house are many mansions, Jesus saying, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, ye may be also. And this is God's vision of the future for the saints of all ages, that they all might be one, as God is one with Jesus, they being one in us, and all living together under one roof, God coming to earth, God's house coming to earth. In my Father's house are many mansions, many rooms, many apartments, and all of this coming to earth on the new earth. And here you have the saints of all ages, he that overcometh, those that receive Jesus into their hearts, inheriting all things, and having a place in this New Jerusalem, this great city, which comes down, one big city under one roof, one big house, and one big city under one roof. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honour into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there is no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honour, honourable nations coming in. And they shall bring the glory and the honour of the nations into it. This is something they're trying to do in the world now, but the problem is it doesn't follow that the glory and the honour of the nations get to mix together in one city, in one sense, in one country, in many countries, in multicultural world that they're now trying to bring in. The problem is that the cultures don't mix, the religions don't mix, and so they're trying to bring in a great mixture where everyone finally gets on in one big mixture. But here you have the absolute God's vision for the world, one city, and all of the world, all the nations of the world, all the kingdoms of the world, indeed living together, and not and all having no doubt their individualistic national traits and their individualistic colours and what have you, whether you're black or white or yellow or red or whatever you are, they're all going to live together under one roof in God's heavenly New Jerusalem. In all of these, in my Father's house are many mansions, many apartments. No one needs to be homeless. And he that overcometh shall inherit all things, the saints of all ages living together under one roof in this New Jerusalem. And no dispute or argument or fight or war regarding cultures and religions and rich nations, poor nations, all living together under one roof and bringing the glory and the honour of the nations into it. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. And the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honour into it, so honourable kingdoms. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there.
And they shall bring the glory and honour of the nations into it, and there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever work of abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. So I just end it here with this last verse. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God, and of the Lamb. So we're in Revelation chapter 22. In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, so you have this, he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street of it, so you have this one street in the midst, it says, in the midst of the street of it. So unlike here, you have cars going down the streets, down the roads. Here you have this river going down the centre, down the middle of this street. So in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. So his name in their foreheads. Not the name or the number of the beast or the number of his name in their foreheads, but Jesus' name in their foreheads. This is what the New World Order are trying to create on earth, this new heaven on earth, a counterfeit for God's eventual heaven on earth, where we have Jesus, where we have God coming to earth, and we have his name, the name of Jesus, in our foreheads. There shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. So there is, and there shall be no more night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. This is God's, this is the vision God has for the future on the new earth, new heaven, and the new earth. This is the climax for mankind. Those that make it through the great white throne judgment haven't had their names blotted out of the book of life. And here it says the leaves of the trees but for the healing of the nations. So all of those people that didn't receive Jesus in this life, didn't receive Jesus even in the afterlife and in the underworld of Hades, get to have another chance, another chance on this new earth, the leaves of the trees, it says, for the healing of the nations. If we've received Jesus into our hearts, then we are already healed spiritually. But those who haven't had their name blotted out of the book of life yet, give God now giving the world another chance to indeed receive true salvation. He that is the first, let him drink, and he that is the first, he that overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. And he said unto me, it is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is the first of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. So why not overcome now? And then you'll know that your place is sure. And when Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions, if it were not so, I would have told you. Why am I telling you all of this if it isn't true? Why is Jesus telling us that in my Father's house are many mansions, many apartments? You too can have a place in God's kingdom. You can have, in this sense, a mansion, in other words, an apartment in God's block mansion, in God's heavenly New Jerusalem. Why not make your place sure and secure now? Why wait till dying and going to the underworld and then standing before the great white throne judgment to see if your name is blotted out of the book of life, if you yet been given another chance on the new earth to receive the leaves of the trees which are for the healing of the nations, when you can make your place sure now by receiving the overcomer into your world. Jesus said, I have overcome the world. Be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. So in believing in Jesus, we too have already overcome the world, and our place is sure on the new earth. And he that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. So praise Jesus.